Are all this series is all hiring managers who are here to share their wisdom and experience with you so that you can have a more successful internship or job search. So I'd like to welcome our guest today, Tim Baker. He's a principal technical program manager at Amazon in Tempe. And by the way, Tim, congratulations on 11 years at Amazon. So
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So Tim, as I said, is a principal technical program manager at Amazon's Tempe Software Development Center, and he obsesses over engineering and operational excellence for an organization of thousands of Amazonians. I hope I said that right. Prior to that, he helped affect public health outcomes as a software engineer and software development manager at Scientific Technologies Corporation. Tim is a proud Sun Devil and serves as a liaison between Amazon, Tempe, and Fulton Schools of Engineering. And we so appreciate your support, Tim. He spends most of his spare time with his wife and 6 sons, and we are going to open the floor to Tim now to impart some advice for all of you. So welcome, Tim. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you inviting me. Good to be here.
Thank you. So we're going to ask a few kind of opening questions, and then we will be opening the questions up to the audience. So those of you that are in attendance, if you have questions, you can go ahead and put those in the chat at any time, but please know we are not going to ask those questions of Tim until till the second half of our presentation today. So Tim, first question. So preparing for a career and job hunting is a big topic. So what advice do you have for our students so they can get the job that they really want upon graduation?
That's a good question. You're starting with the big meaty ones. I like it. So the way I think about this question, there's really kind of two parts to the answer. Because the first part is figuring out what job you really want, and then how do you get that job? And I think a lot of times people make assumptions around what job they think they want, but it's so important to get that first step right and really spend some time thinking about it. So when I say what job do you truly want, have you factored in things like the company's culture? I think that's becoming increasingly important to applicants, to people in the job market, really across generations, but especially for some of the younger generations. They want to work for a company where the culture is in line with their personal feelings on things. And then there's also this question that's come up pretty recently around like how much time are you comfortable spending in the office? Are you okay if they require you to be in the office at all? Or are you only going to look for companies that not only might say you can work remotely today, but have a track record of not reversing course on some of those decisions? Because we've seen a lot of companies that might say that at one moment and then change their minds. So for example, do they not have physical offices? That's going to be much more likely that you'll stay remote than if they do have a physical office. And if they do have a physical office, how close are you to that office? Uh, if you're okay going into an office, is it going to be hybrid where you're okay with 3 days a week, but not 5? Or would you be okay going 5 days a week? On some of the other questions around things like, do you have to travel? Some people love travel, so that's not only not a problem, but they would embrace that. And other people, it's like, no, I've got all sorts of reasons why I'm not comfortable traveling, or I've got responsibilities back at home, so I can't travel. Do some homework into some of those things. It might vary by the position and or the company. Maybe another one that you could think about is an on-call requirement. So here at Amazon, for example, you have a pager. Some people still choose to have a physical pager, but it's at least a software pager on your phone. And the pager rotates to different engineers who are on call each week. And you could get paged out of bed during that week if something goes wrong because we own our systems end to end. So we'll get one more thing to think about. Come up with your own list, though. I like to build I call a weighted decision matrix. So it's like a pros and cons list, and just very old school, write it down, pros on one column, cons in the other column. But instead of just kind of summing up what are my pros and what are my cons, I like to assign a weight to each of them. So for example, I might say, I like to travel, but only a little bit. Like it's not a big deal if I never got to travel. That wouldn't be a deal breaker. So on a scale of 1 to 5, I like to travel, and that's a 2. And maybe I'd rather not come into the office 5 days a week. That would be a con if I had to do that. And how big a deal is that to me? Maybe that's a 3 or a 4. That's a bigger deal. And then you can sum up for each opportunity, each company that you're investigating, what the pros are and the cons are, not just 1, 2, 3, but sum up those numbers. And the interesting thing is, I've been around for a while now, and I've done that for important decisions in my life several times. And after I do that, the decision becomes much clearer. As long as I'm fair with myself about what would those pros and cons look like and how am I weighting them based on how I truly feel, not maybe how my parents wanted me to feel or how my spouse or society wants me to feel. It usually is pretty clear. For me, it's always been very clear at the end. Wow, this one really got more points, whether that's pro or con. Then when it comes to getting your job, so that helps you figure out, like, narrow it down. What job should you potentially pursue? Now, how do you get that? That's definitely a lot of hard work. And so I don't want to minimize that. I don't want to kind of put on rose-colored glasses and pretend like it's all easy. It's always been hard, and I feel like it's only getting harder lately. So be intentional about getting that job. It's almost like you have to have a job of trying to get a job, if that makes sense. In other words, you have to invest time into that as if it was another part-time job on top of whatever else you're doing. And you need to make that time available in your life on your calendar, because jobs aren't very likely to just kind of fall onto your lap. Occasionally happens, people can be very lucky, but for the most part, you have to work pretty hard to get that. So going back to what companies were you interested in, learn about what they value, and then develop skills, develop things that are tangible that you can put on your resume around what a company values. So I'll stop speaking in generalities. For Amazon, we have the 16 leadership principles. So if you haven't heard of them, they're kind of the Amazon soft skills that we look at. They're also kind of the secret sauce for what makes somebody an Amazonian, and it does a nice job of summarizing our culture across. Last I looked, we had like 1.5 million people in Amazon, and it's hard to have culture across that number of people. So we use these leadership principles, and they're not just something we roll out when it's time for recruiting or when it's time for our evaluations. We believe in them, we talk about them, we pepper our language and our emails with them. So if you wanted a role at Amazon, get to know those leadership principles. And many companies have something very similar to leadership principles. They might be called something else, and the list might differ, but get to know that company's equivalent of the leadership principles, and then kind of work backwards from that. What do you have on your resume that embodies those leadership principles? So predict that you'll be asked questions. Tell me about a time when you, at least that's a big way of introducing an interview question to Amazon. And if you have a list of examples from your life, and they could be part of your classwork, part of your group work, part of your job experience or internships, if you already had those, you can go and say, okay, I've already put together this list that I have curated that best represents these various leadership principles as best you can. And as a hiring manager, I get it, we all get it, that as a full-time student, you won't have the same breadth of examples as somebody who's been in the industry for 20 years. That's okay, but come up with the best examples that you can, that so that when we say, tell me about a time when you exhibited this kind of behavior, you can go, I remember when I was looking through the leadership principles, it sounds like maybe they're getting at customer obsession. I'm going to use my customer obsession example. And you can pull that one out and work backwards from, if you don't have all of those examples, start building them now. You're still at the beginning of the semester coming up. So presumably you've got an entire, at least semester, if not an entire school year, to build things still. It's not too late.
Excellent. Thank you. Great advice, Tim. Great advice. Thank you so much. A lot of what you're talking about is really about that community and culture being so vital to that balance and that job satisfaction. And of course, if you're not happy in your job, you're not going to be productive to your team, right? So
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So kind of following up on that, do you have an example that you can share with us of someone that you think did a good job of career prep while in college?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is the opposite of what you're asking for, and that's somebody who didn't do a very good job at preparing, and that's me. So at Amazon, we say we're being vocally self-critical. So I didn't do the greatest job, and maybe that example helps resonate with people as well, because I'm still here, and I think it's a type of job and company that a lot of people aspire to. So it goes to show that you can mess up early on, and it's not the end of the world. You can still get to the kind of job that you'd been hoping for. To give you a little more context, when I was a student, I was really focused on working in holding a job. Basically, it wasn't even in the computer science related field. I was literally managing Taco Bell. But by managing a Taco Bell, I didn't have any student loans. Yay. So that was kind of my thought process, was don't have student loans so you don't start saddled with a bunch of debt. And then I had a bunch of time that I spent on my coursework, but that didn't give me time to do something like an internship or even really think about an internship. But I was super lucky because I had a friend, one of my fellow students, who said, "Hey, there's this internship that I just got, and they're looking for one more person. You should apply. I think you do well at it." And I took his advice. What's the worst that can happen? So that's probably a good mindset to have in life overall, is what's the worst that can happen rather than being fearful about things. So I gave it a shot and got the position and ended up working a full-time job plus a part-time internship, plus going to school. It was a lot, but I got that experience a little bit later than most people would, but I did at least get that internship, and that actually led to my first full-time job. So a little bit of luck there, but also a little bit of maybe having the right mindset to try new things when they come up. As for somebody who did a good job, I can remember this is right before the pandemic. There was a student who approached me at an event, and it was at this engineering society. And the invitees were from all over the country, and she'd flown in from another state. And there's this long line of people waiting to come talk to somebody from Amazon. And she waited patiently, and then she showed me her resume, and she clearly customized this resume for me, for Amazon, because it had these little notes on the side in the margin where she had written which leadership principles applied to the different things that she had done on her resume. And I like that. She also came equipped with great questions. They were deeper questions than you would ask if you just kind of did a cursory examination on the website. These weren't the kind of answers you could find on our website, or just kind of going to the casual info session or something. She clearly put a lot of thought into that. So that led to getting her into our system to apply for the position. She did well from there on out, it was all on her. She did super well. She became an intern, and then ultimately she got a job offer. So we ended up hiring her full time.
Great story, great story. And thank you for emphasizing the customizing to the company. I think that's the biggest challenge we sometimes have in our roles, is helping
Yeah.
people understand like the value of that, because you're the audience, right? So thank you for sharing that. Kind of moving on to another question: how can students learn more about the roles in your industry and at Amazon?
Yeah, good question. So Amazon has a website where you can find all of the positions that are available to students or recent graduates. I'm going to give it to you slowly, so folks want to jot it down in case you aren't familiar, but it's amazon.jobs/student-programs. So I'll give that one more time, amazon.jobs/student-programs. And if you go to, so amazon.jobs has all of our positions, and you're certainly welcome to take a look at those. But I really recommend that students take a look at those student programs positions specifically, because they aren't available to folks who have been in industry for a while or who have graduated a while back. So I should say it that way. As long as you're a student or you recently graduated, I think it's within the last 6 months, then you're eligible for those student programs positions. And basically what I'm saying is that the playing field, while it's certainly large, is smaller than the positions that we open up for everybody in industry. And also we understand that for those positions, we're not expecting, when I was going back talking about the leadership principles and your examples that you would put together for these types of roles, we know that you're not going to have the breadth of leadership principle type examples that I was describing before, and that's okay. Whereas if you apply for the positions that are open up to everybody, then even for a relatively entry-level position, you're still going to compete with people who likely have a lot more experience than you do. And then learning more about the roles, there's a button on that site that says something like join our talent network. Last I remember it. So if you click on that button, it gives you the opportunity to basically get on our mailing list. But it's a mailing list, my understanding, I don't work for student programs, so sometimes things change without me knowing about it. But last I knew, it was customized for what is your graduation date and what kind of roles are you looking for. And what that mailing list does is it will give you information when Amazon does things like info sessions, for example. So we'll do things like, and I've been part of them before, where we'll have maybe a panel of people talking about more specific than what we're going to talk about today about getting into your resume. For example, we've done things like demoed what it looks like from both sides of being part of an interview at Amazon. So you'll be less worried, less you'll be more kind of calm and at ease when you know what the process is going to look like. So I would definitely encourage you to sign up for that so that you get that information, so that you see those demonstrations. They're a really good resource.
Thanks, Tim. And folks that are on the session, make sure you're looking at the chat because our moderator, Thea Fuller, did put that link and the note about join our talent network in the chat for your reference. So
Thank you, Thea.
Thank you, Tim. Kind of changing gears just a little bit. The last few years have seen a lot of changes in the economy. And I think, especially for computer science majors. So what are some of the areas where those changes have impacted opportunities at Amazon?
Yeah, it's been hard. My heart goes out to people who've been affected by the job market. I don't know if everybody's aware, but last year Amazon had its biggest layoffs in the history of the company. And ever since then, we've been very thoughtful about any position that we are opening. So we are growing now, but the pace isn't the same as it was a few years ago. And that's led to a lot of competition for the positions that are open. So I don't have a great solution for that. It kind of is the situation that we're in today. I can say, having been through several economic downturns in the past, that it's a pendulum. It does swing both ways. I know it's super hard when you live through it. I've been part of layoffs, for example, where I struggled to find my next job. But the good news is that I always did find another job. The pendulum does swing back. It might be more of an employer's market today, and I don't know how long it'll be. I wish I had that crystal ball. But at some point, the pendulum does swing back, and it's more of a employees market where it'll be your skills will be sought more and more, and it'll open up more of the job market. And I think that's why it's so important right now, though, to put together that strong resume. You were talking about making sure it's customized. That's helpful. Mastering those soft skills. The tech almost feel like goes without saying. Super important, obviously. It's foundational. You can't get a job such as an SDE, a software development engineer, at Amazon without those strong tech skills. But sometimes people focus on them almost to the exclusion of those soft skills, those leadership principles. Communication is huge. How well do you communicate in written communication, in verbal communication? I think some people think that, and every company is different, but they think at Amazon, you're just going to like kind of put your head down and write a bunch of code if you're an SDE. And there's certainly a lot of code writing, but there's also a lot of document writing. And the higher you get at Amazon, the more time you spend writing documents. I remember coming here and being like, oh, I'm so thankful I was in the honors program through Barrett, because they made me do a lot of writing and I was not prepared for the amount of writing I had to do. So brush up on those skills as well while you have the opportunity, because you want to stand out among a large group. So professionalism is another big one. And that doesn't necessarily mean showing up in a jacket and tie when you go to a career fair, for example, but how you present yourself. Are you clearly investing your time, making it important, showing that you're making it important to get this job to the people you're interacting with in the company? That does go a long way, because we want to see you take that and transform it into being just as passionate once you already are getting a job opportunity.
Thank you. One other thing that that you said that kind of resonates with me is the whole documentation, and I've been looking at some panels for a different uh, project, but that's one thing that they talk about all the time is the need to document because you're going to move on either within the company or outside, and someone's going to have to take care of that program or that equipment, right? So having that documentation is so vital.
Yeah.
Um, okay, kind of a related question, but we're seeing, all these articles that describe thousands of applicants for a single job. That's got to be hard on the hiring manager. But what can students do to raise the probability of getting their resume through, the ATS through the initial screening so that they might get an interview?
I don't have a foolproof suggestion for this one that will always do it. But something that comes to mind is that our positions are based on your graduation date. So make that easy to find. Put that right on the top of your resume. The reason I say that is, for example, if you're going to graduate this coming May, then you are not eligible for a summer internship. And it's not about your ability, your capability, how willing you would be to be an intern. It just is a policy. You can't be an intern after you've already graduated. So that's why that date is so important. And we tend to be conservative, meaning if we don't see the date and we don't know, we can't tell when your graduation is, then we kind of have to assume the worst. So make sure that's there. Another one would be, now I don't know what the automated system is looking for. That's actually one of those situations where Amazon puts its data, it's very safe about its data. Only people who have a need to know those types of things. But as a person who manually reviews some of the resumes, I like to see data points on a resume. And I'd imagine if something's scanning through even in an automated way, that looking for data points, if I was to try to create a system that was going to automate that, I would include it. And so think about, how do you put metrics around what you have on your resume? If you've done an internship, what did that mean in terms of how you delivered to the customer? How many customers? How big a thing was it? Big could be throughput, so how many transactions per second? It could be how many concurrent users. There's all sorts of different ways we could look at data to show what the impact was. If you have access to dollar amounts, put that. We had an impact of X amount of money. We're not looking for you to have necessarily worked at another Amazon type level of company at this point, but just knowing that you're being thoughtful about using data points will be really helpful to you at a career at Amazon or companies like Amazon.
Excellent. So yeah, it's all about defining the scope and outcomes, right? Scope and
Yeah,
outcomes.
yeah.
So kind of on that point, like what makes a resume stand out to you, either positively or negatively? I mean, you've kind of touched on that, but is there anything else?
Yeah, I've touched on a few. So I think they're worth bringing up again, though. So we've got data points that we just talked about. Be obsessed about your customer. So Amazon, like I said, we have these customer obsession. We have these leadership principles, and I always see the one that's written first is customer obsession. They're not a stack ranked list, but I always see that one comes up top, and I think that's on purpose. We do obsess over the customers. We want to make prices as low as we can, get things out as fast as we can, continue to offer more and more selection. All those things are true, but also goes to the customer experience. We want a hassle-free, pain-free experience. So if you can help demonstrate to me when I'm reading your resume how your position that you've had at another company, at an internship, tie it back to what were you doing for people? What were you doing for human beings? In other words, the metrics that I described are also important, but let's get that empathetic human face on it. And saying empathy, that kind of triggered that I like to see volunteer work on resumes as well. I don't think that's something we've touched on yet, because volunteer work shows that you're willing to invest this super limited resource. None of us have any more time than what we're given on this earth, so to speak. And You can't make more. So you can spend it kind of selfishly, or you can spend it on other people. And we all need to find the right balance for us. But if you're spending time volunteering for a cause, whatever that cause is, it shows that even without compensation, without getting paid for what you're doing, you're willing to invest your time and effort into that volunteer work. And it's not that Amazon's expecting you to work for free or something, but we would love to know that you'll put that kind of obsession over somebody who's not yourself into the products that you build, the services that you build on behalf of our customers. It might sound cheesy, but that really is the way we think about things. And then one more thing that I just thought of was if you're involved with student organizations, put that on your resume as well. SOTA comes to mind in particular. That's the Software Development Association at ASU. Amazon works with them quite a bit. We do usually about 2 info sessions that go very deep into like a tech talk kind of a forum about twice a semester on average, I think. We sponsor their hackathon. So that's another great opportunity. And we're not alone, by the way. It's not just like an Amazon thing. There are other industry companies that are represented there as well. So seeing that, again, you're spending your time, this time it's a little different. Now I'm talking about you're spending your limited time making yourself better, not just doing the minimum requirement that your coursework mandates, but you're spending your time because you're so passionate about computer science, about software engineering, that you're dedicating time away from your coursework into that and getting better at it. And then you mentioned briefly that like what makes a resume stand out in a negative way, I'm going to say not proofreading your resume. I've known recruiters who will just take a resume and quite literally throw it in the trash or the virtual trash if they find any glaring typos or errors in the resume. It really reflects that you didn't spend your time doing that extra step. Or if you need to, find somebody else, find a friend who's good at proofreading things and editing and ask them to do a quick pass and help you out there. Because if your resume has problems, then it really speaks to how likely is the quality of your work going to be better than what we're seeing on the resume.
Excellent points. I like what you said about people are important too, and then just now asking for help, support. I mean, not that they're gonna do your work for you, but can you just look at this? I'm a crappy writer and you're great. You know?
Yeah,
So, so I just have one more question for you, Tim, and then please, participants that are on this call, this is my last question. So if you have questions for Tim, we're going to be opening it up here in just a couple minutes. So make sure you get those in the chat. I see there are a few in there already. So please be getting those ready, and Thea will then relay those for you, Tim. So
sure. Sounds good.
my last question in kind of our structured part here is kind of related to the interview, or related to the resume, but then the next step, of course, is the interview. What are some of the common mistakes that students can avoid in an interview?
Yeah, that's important too, right? That's how you get to the finish line, so to speak. The biggest mistake that I've observed when I've been the interviewer at Amazon is about time management, is really what it comes down to. Amazon, for those who aren't aware, we do our interviews, and this can be a little bit different for student programs. So let me be transparent about that because we rely a little more heavily on automation for student programs. But for even for some of the student program positions, and certainly for the industry positions, we have interviews. They might be in person if you're local. If not, they'll be over video conferencing. And you as a candidate will meet with multiple people, typically around 4 people for a position. And each of those kind of mini interviews will be about 45 minutes to an hour long. And the person from Amazon is there to ensure that he or she walks away confident that the candidate is, I'll call it like checking the boxes, for lack of a better term, for certain skill sets that we were explicitly sent to go into that interview to find. So they could be leadership principles, they could be technical competencies, it could be a blend of both. But we have that limited amount of time, 45 minutes to 60 minutes, to either say, yes, this candidate does have, let's use my example before, customer obsession. Does this candidate have customer obsession? Are they able to write clear, logical, maintainable code? If yes, great, then you're likely to move on to the next part of the process. If no, then you'll probably get the rejection letter, unfortunately. And so be thoughtful about how you're answering questions, because I, as an interviewer, I'm going to have to ask follow-up questions, and I probably have a series of questions that I need to ask. So you need to strike this balance between giving me enough information versus giving me too much information or not enough. I've had both extremes. I've had candidates where I ask them a question and it is really challenging to get more than a one-word answer from them. It's like, please give me a little bit more. I don't have time to keep on asking follow-up questions for every word. On the other extreme, I ask one question and I get their life story, and I get that people are nervous. It's hard to do an interview for sure on both sides, to be honest. But practice, that's where you can practice with somebody else. Going back to asking people for help and partnering up with people, ask somebody else to walk you through a virtual interview is so helpful, because you can get a sense of how long your answers are. And the interviewer can always ask those follow-up questions if they want to hear more from you. And then the other thing I was thinking about for interviews is it's usually more for the technical questions. Don't be silent when you solve the questions. So here's an example. You've got kind of our stripped down bare bones IDE on your computer as you're going through a virtual interview. And you get a question from the interviewer, and now you're going to use this IDE to write some code. If you go silent on us, then as a interviewer, I have no idea what you're thinking. I can see the code that you're typing as you type it on the screen, but if I'm not really following along, then, and meaning I don't understand what you're trying to do, then if you get stuck, I won't even know what you were trying to accomplish in the first place. And then I can't help you. And the worst thing is to get to the end of the interview and not have a working solution at all. It's much better to kind of walk through things. And I would much rather say, hey, have you thought about this? And yeah, I might mark it in my notes that I had to give you a nudge in that direction. But if I do it once or twice, it's not a big deal. If I have to do it every step of the way, that is worse. But it's much better to get that one or two nudges so that I understand how you're thinking about things. And I can't get that unless you're talking. So constantly kind of talk through, okay, I'm thinking about it this way. I'm going to need an object that's going to do this. And oh, I bet I'm going to need some inheritance for this other object that you mentioned, and kind of talk through those types of solutions so that the interviewer can actually be a help to you.
I love how you describe that kind of like problem solving out loud. And I think that kind of goes to the documentation point that you made earlier too. You know, it's like now we know what your assumptions were, and where you're going. So we have several questions in the chat. I also loved what you said about enough, too much, or not enough. We see that a lot too. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Thea, and can you pull up some of the questions that are coming through from students? I know some are coming to you on private chat, so please share those.
Yeah, absolutely. So first question here is, do you look at LinkedIn profiles for candidates?
I do, but I want to be clear that it's probably helpful to understand just real briefly, student programs doesn't connect students with the hiring managers in advance. So in other words, if I say this coming summer, I would like one SDE who is coming from a university graduate, I won't know who that person is until they're already assigned to me. So at that point, once I know the name, I can go to LinkedIn just to kind of get a sense of what university did they graduate from? Is there anything they specialized in? Do they have any industry experience? But that's happening all the way at the end. You've literally already got the offer letter and have been assigned to a team by the time I do that. It's a little bit different. And by the way, that's standard across student programs. If you're working with student programs, you won't know who your hiring manager is, or at least it would be very unusual for you to know who they are. So you really couldn't reach out to them on LinkedIn, for example, and the manager won't know who you are until the end of the process. Now, when it's industry hiring, it can be a little bit different, which is probably not what this group wants to hear more about. So I'll just to keep it super brief, yes, if it's an industry hire, then I will likely have more say in who the candidates are who I'm even considering for the position. And then I can take a look at their LinkedIn to get a sense of some of the things I was describing before.
Great, thank you. Kind of staying on similar notes, talking about the student hires that you're referring to. How does Amazon equip graduate hires with skills necessary for advancement within the industry?
So we're talking about people who are already now in Amazon, or
Correct. So students that are then hired on a team, how do
Mhm.
they gain the skills to advance within the industry?
So Amazon has tons of internal training available to us. Training, panels, entire events. We have an event called DevCon, multiple actually, because we have a different DevCon in different continents. So you can go to DevCon in EU if you're working in the EU, or DevCon here in the US. And so we have all these different opportunities for learning more about a topic. When you think about just how big Amazon is and our desire to continue to push the cutting edge of not just technology, but process improvement and those leadership principles that I was describing that are so important to us. So we get training on being empathetic and having a high EQ and how to use the leadership principles as best you can. The whole gamut is available to you. It's really up to you as an Amazonian to decide how much time are you going to invest, and is it going to be in the areas that are going to be most helpful. Now, sometimes you'll be assigned a training as well, or maybe your manager will say, I would love for you to go to Grace Hopper, for example, and get that opportunity. Maybe it's a little bit different from training, but maybe it's DevCon. Maybe we say we'd love for you to go to DevCon and take that opportunity. But more often than not, it's actually up to you, and you get to control your destiny in that way.
Great, thank you. Okay, hold on, just trying to piece through all these. So
Sure.
are there any particular technical electives that you would recommend to students?
Yes. I don't remember the course number, but there's a 400 level course on databases. And last I knew, it was not mandatory for your degree. I'm speaking specifically to CS degrees. Um, I've yet to see an enterprise system that doesn't rely on a database of some sort. And really, at this point, you need to know at least relational databases to even speak the language to get into the non-SQL, the NoSQL databases that more and more companies tend to use. So if I had to pick just one, and please correct me if something's changed in the curriculum and now that's a mandatory class, but based on my knowledge, that's the one that I would pick.
Great, thank you. Do you review student portfolios as part of the hiring process?
For student programs, no, I don't, because going back to what I was saying before about how the students get connected very late in the process, that's intentional. So we want generalists rather than specialists from the students who are applying at Amazon. We want to put you as a student, as a new hire, into a position that's a little bit uncomfortable, where you don't know all of the components of the tech stack. You don't know the problem that you're trying to solve, because especially as an SDE1, we want to see how well you can adapt to those hard situations that come up, because they're just going to keep on coming throughout your career. Certainly at a place like Amazon, there's really no opportunity to just kind of get comfy and let things be the status quo. It's always changing around here. So for SDE1s, what we don't want is for you to say, I have done a lot of specialization in my 400 level classes, or maybe I went and got my master's and I'm great at computer vision, and therefore we're going to put you into a team that's, I don't know, using computer vision to analyze documents. That might sound like it would be the best use of your skills, but we actually find that in those situations, you can kind of use your specialty as a bit of a crutch, so that you're not having to learn as much new stuff as you otherwise would. So you can almost think of your SDE1 phase. It's kind of like, it's almost like an uh, extended interview, if you will. We're observing you, you're observing us to see how well do you do when you're in these ambiguous situations and you still need to solve the problem.
Hey, Tim, we've got a question about keywords on the resume. You know, do you like to see those highlighted, you know, using bolding or something similar?
I don't have a strong opinion on it. I think as a human, if you use very judicious bolding. It can be helpful for things to stand out. I can't imagine that. I mean, I really don't know, but I wouldn't think that our automation is going to pick up on formatting at that point. It probably has stripped it down to its text to begin with. And really, by the time I see a resume, if it's an industry hire, then whether or not I want to move forward with something does have the hiring manager, you get my say, so to speak. But for student programs, I don't think you necessarily get that opportunity in advance. So it probably doesn't make a big difference.
Okay, thank you. And
Mm-hmm.
there's two questions about your comments on, you know, how long to take to answer questions in the interview.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what are we talking about? Like a minute? Do you have, you know, a
Yeah, how
guideline
long is
here?
too
Like,
long?
yeah, is
It's
2
gonna
minutes too
vary.
long? Is you know,
2 minutes is probably perfectly fine. It depends on the question for sure. Some questions are
sure.
going to need a little more time to breathe. You need to paint the picture, but keeping in mind this is like there's probably only 45 minutes for the whole interview, then 2 minutes is probably a great start. 5 minutes is probably the top that I would give any question before and I'd probably be trying very hard to read the facial expressions on the person in the other side of the room or the camera to make sure that are their eyes glazing over and they're getting bored with this, and have a way that I can short circuit what I was planning to tell them so that I can get it done in 3 minutes instead of 5 if I look like I'm boring them.
Okay. And then kind of a technical question about the coding interview process. Do you think it's better to go from the brute force solution to the optimal solution, or do you think the optimal solution is what you are looking for from the start?
I like to go brute force because going back to it's much better to have a working solution than no solution at all is important to us. Now, if because maybe you get like partial credit if we can kind of understand that you're trying to optimize it, but you're working under a time constraint, you're stressed, your heart rate is up, you're perspiring. So don't go for the fanciest solution, even if you kind of have a sense of it. If you know it, and we have seen candidates that they just get to the most optimized solution right then and there. That's not a bad thing, but there's also nothing wrong, and you won't lose points if you got to the brute force solution. This is where talking is important. Get to the brute force solution and say that early. Say, I recognize that this isn't the most optimized solution, but it's important that we get something that works first. So I'm going to write that down. Maybe even ask, is that okay? Like you're there with another human being. Ask them, are you okay with that? I strongly suggest or suspect that they'll say yes, and then do that brute force solution and say, okay, now let me think about how would I optimize it, and start walking through that. If you don't get to the fully optimized solution, it might not be as great an interview as somebody who does, but you're not, but you're at least you got the point, so to speak, for getting the working solution.
Okay. We have a question about really master's degree, yes or no? Let me read the question directly. Which option would be better between getting a master's degree or just essentially going to work with industry experience?
That's such a hard question to answer because it's going to be
Uh-huh.
very personal depending on the person. So I can say I'll go ahead and do my best to take a stab at it, but I'm basing it on Amazon and me personally. So I don't have a master's degree. I actually started getting my master's degree and I was a little bit shy of finishing it, and I dropped out because I couldn't keep doing my industry work and pursuing my master's degree. And suddenly I had 3 kids by then. So it was a little bit too much to balance family and education and work. And here I am. So it worked out okay for me. Amazon doesn't give a different interview whether or not you have a master's degree or a bachelor's degree. Whether our algorithm is actually looking for whether you have a master's or not, that's hard to say. I really don't know the answer to that. But my suspicion is, I don't know. I won't even give my suspicion, is totally conjecture. But the one thing where your higher degrees will make a difference is like a research scientist. So we've been talking mostly about STE positions, but as a research scientist, somebody who's going to help with the new models for machine learning, for example, you need to have that deep science and mathematics. For those, we often require a PhD or at least a master's degree, and we prefer a PhD. So if that's ultimately what you're looking for, it's kind of a do research on the position in the company. For some companies, you won't get your foot in the door without a master's degree. So I don't want to be like, oh, that Tim guy, he told me not to get a master's degree. It really varies based on the company and the position.
Thank you. We've gotten a couple of questions that kind of are along this line. What skills should we focus on developing to be successful in the tech industry, technical and non-technical?
For the technical, I think getting practice with the kind of technologies that we're seeing companies move towards more and more is helpful. I love ASU. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. And this is not just an ASU thing, it's kind of a greater education thing, is education is like a big ship and it's a little bit slower to turn than industry. So I feel like sometimes industry is sprinting ahead, learning new things, experimenting, and then that kind of comes back and gets incorporated into curriculums. So do some homework and think about what are you seeing, what tech stacks are being used in the companies that you're interested in too. That's a big help. But it's probably a good idea to kind of overshoot, go for what some of the bigger companies are using, and then you're likely going to already be covered for the companies that are a little bit smaller, maybe don't have that same budget. But things like AWS, as an example, are you at least comfortable logging into an AWS console, maybe firing up some EC2 host, understanding the difference between DynamoDB and an S3 bucket, like some of these big concepts of queuing and Lambda functions and things like that as well in the AWS. It doesn't have to be AWS. You could use Azure, you can use Google solution, but some kind of cloud computing with understanding and then getting some hands-on experience with it. Write some small projects, find something that is a hobby of yours. And so you're passionate enough that you'll see it through to completion. Maybe it'll make your hobby easier or better somehow if you write some software for it. So experiment with those things and you'll be able to both speak to it more intelligently and you'll have those skill sets. And then on the soft skills, I think we've touched on those quite a bit already, but I talked about the communication is a big one. Yeah, I'm going to harp on that one more time. Like communication, professionalism, getting back to your recruiter in a reasonable amount of time. That doesn't mean you have to have the notifications turned on your phone and get woken up at 2 a.m. or something like that. But a reasonable amount of time is don't keep them waiting for a week to get back to them. So many people, I don't know, it's interesting. They seem to just not be focused on, I'll call it the golden rule, do unto others, right? As you would have them do unto you. Put yourself in the shoes. It works for customer obsession, but it also works for thinking of the recruiter as yet another person. That empathy I was talking about, be empathetic. And if you aren't, empathy can absolutely be trained. So you can practice empathy. There are books that are written, there are courses that are written on how to be more empathetic. You can do things to raise your EQ, because the emphasis on EQ here at Amazon right now for the last several years is huge. Like that's the big thing that we're pushing right now, is we want more and more empathetic employees, both for their interactions with one another, but also our interactions with our customers.
Tim, what about having students, applicants reach out to professionals from the departments at Amazon where students are applying to? Is that a practice that helps them, or don't bother?
It would be challenging. The recruiters, as far as I know, explicitly will not respond to messages on LinkedIn. They just can't scale to that kind of intake. Like you were saying before, there can be thousands of people who are applying for a single position. So they basically have to shut off the messaging on their LinkedIn. And that's probably that's probably the only person, especially when you're working with student programs, that you have any contact with. So can you find somebody else in the industry and connect with them? You can, and there's no harm doing it. I just want to make sure I set expectations that they probably can't do a lot for you. They might be able to, if they're willing, give you some general advice. Some of the types of advice I've been giving today, they might be able to provide via LinkedIn, but that's really on them, whether or not they want to make that investment into other people. Are they going to live by the golden rule as much as I'm saying here? They won't be able to say much about or anything about your specific application, for example, because like I was describing, they won't even know what team you're potentially going to get matched to. That's really more of a luck of the draw type of a thing. So limited results, I would say, trying to connect with people on LinkedIn here.
Thank you. A question about students who who were not able to intern prior to graduation and now are finding themselves not having enough experience as they apply to jobs for the kinds of roles they're seeking. Do you have any advice for students in that situation, how they can maybe get the kind of experience you just described?
Yeah, that is hard. A couple things that come to mind. One is kind of around broadening your net around what companies you're looking at. I find that some people are very focused on those FANG companies. They desperately want to get their foot in the door at Amazon. And if you don't have an internship, that's probably going to be pretty challenging because you don't have the kind of leadership principles, the exposure to that kind of industry experience that we're looking for and we're going to ask questions about in the interview process, even to somebody who's a recent graduate, for example. So there are so many companies that need software engineering, though. So don't limit yourself to the biggest companies or to a particular area. You can still make that the thing that you're aspiring to. That can still be your North Star vision. You ultimately want to get there someday. Build a plan for yourself. But you can say, I'm going to give myself X number of years. I know years seems like a long time, but by the time you're getting to my point in life, you're like, oh, a few years actually wasn't that much. Give yourself a few years to build that industry experience in a different industry, because there are definitely industries where they're happy to get somebody who can help them solve some of these technical problems. They don't have that expertise. You might even be kind of the jack of all trades, doing everything technical in that company. That's kind of the way I started. And it gives you a lot of more of a breadth of skills, even if it's not as much of the quick pace that Amazon might provide. So that's kind of one thing to think about. And then the other would be maybe you can get your foot in the door doing something other than being an SDE at a company that you're more passionate about. So for example, at Amazon, it is easier to do an internal transfer to a different role than it is to get hired the first time for that role. So if you're a outside candidate trying to get into Amazon and as a software engineer, that's more challenging than getting onto a team doing something different. So let's say a QA engineer, just to come up with an example. If you're able to get your foot in the door as a QA engineer, and maybe that even took going to a different company first and mastering their QA process. Now you come to Amazon as an experienced QA engineer. That's still not an SDE, but that's where you're trying to head. But then you get this rapport with your manager, with your team, and you say, hey, could I take that one story from the next sprint? I think I'd do a great job at it. And most managers that I know, at least if it was me, I certainly would. I'd say, yeah, let's give you a try. We're always trying to help people grow and stretch at Amazon. And that isn't just going up in their job levels, but going kind of across in breadth and learn entirely new skills. So we give people opportunities to try new things. So get your foot in the door at that company. And then it becomes more about relationship building and proving to somebody that you can do the job you were assigned. Make sure you don't not do that. But then once you've mastered that, now you get to say, now you get that opportunity potentially to say, hey, I'd like to try this other thing too.
Thanks,
Great.
Tim. I just want to point out, we only have time for maybe one more question, and then we need to close up the session. Thanks for
Sure.
your wisdom, Tim.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's go with this one. A question about certifications and relative value in the hiring process. So the direct question is, do AWS certifications like Solutions Architect or Developer Associate help in getting interview calls, at least in the case of Amazon or Amazon Web Services?
I'm going to say, since I don't know the automated system, I can't say for sure. But as a human who reads resumes, they are helpful. They're not really, but they're not required. So they're not the be all end all, but you're always looking for that thing that might help you be differentiated from everybody else in the crowd, especially for these positions that might have lots of people applying. If you know AWS deeply, then that's awesome from the perspective of we trust that you're going to have maybe more cloud computing knowledge than somebody who lacks that. But again, it's not mandatory. So if you are coming from a background where you didn't get that opportunity, there could be other things that help you differentiate yourself on your resume compared to others. But yeah, anything you can do to show that you're investing that time into areas that weren't mandatory for you, whether it's getting better at your tech skills or your empathy, like I was describing, either one of those will serve you well.
Okay, I think that's a wrap, Kathy.
Thank you, Thea and Barbara, for moderating the questions, and thank you, Tim, for sharing your wisdom today. Really informative, and it's wonderful the way that you continue to support our students in the Fulton School